Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, fueling philanthropic programs and dedicated to creating educational and professional opportunities for Alaska Native people.
The National Weather Service.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Kimberley Hoeppner, and today is the Wednesday edition for October 12th, 2016. When we're not here, you can always use the phone line or go online by typing in weather.gov/Alaska and then clicking on your location of choice. And also the broadcast times have also changed, and right here we have a list of when they are going to be broadcasting and the stations that they're broadcasting on. In just a moment, we're going to be touching on your public aviation and marine forecasts. Let's start out with the satellite weather and looking at the first system. Will be looking stretches across the Bering and the Gulf area. Now we have a front that you can see on the cloud cover that's streaming from the southeastern areas of the state, from the Dixon entrance over to Kenai, and then back around the areas of St. Paul, the Pribilof Islands, and down towards Dutch Harbor. So putting that into motion one more time, you can see that the clouds are drifting towards the west in that direction, counterclockwise across the eastern Aleutian area and the Alaska Peninsula, as the low circulation center is in that vicinity. Now taking a look over at the southeast, you'll see another spin down here by the Dixon entrance. A low center in the upper levels is spinning just on the southeastern side of the Gulf of Alaska. Putting this into motion one more time, you can see a very slow spin with cloud cover thickening towards the Dixon entrance. Now here's a surface low pressure. It's just very weak, elongated from the main surface feature that's here just south of the Alaska Peninsula. It was a 972 millibar this afternoon and weakening. Now here's the frontal boundary stretching from the Bristol Bay location back towards the Dixon entrance with some light rain. The main concern across this low pressure system frontal boundary is going to be the winds, gusting between 40 to 55 miles per hour across the Amatui Islands there, and then increased gradient is starting to approach the southeast, so be on the watch out for winds there. Across the central interior area of the state, mostly dry conditions. However, we did have a little area of rain with an upper level wave moving ahead of this low pressure system, just pushing some rain towards the Fairbanks area. Now across the northern coastal location, we have ridging just to the north with low pressure to the south. That ridge is beginning to sag a little bit further south, creating a very strong easterly flow along the coastal locations between 30 and 40 miles per hour. And then back along the northwestern coast, we have a northerly flow primarily. And then along the western areas of the Bering, we have a trough beginning just to sag a little bit further to the south, northwesterly flow on the backside of this low pressure system with a stronger easterly flow from Bristol Bay over to Bethel, becoming a little bit more northeasterly across the northern areas of the Bering. So mainly some light rain conditions making its way across the Bristol Bay area with some showery conditions on the backside of this low pressure system. Now as we head into the nighttime hours, this system will begin to weaken and just mainly a stationary system, light showers, with the winds being the most notable conditions around the low pressure center. Now also the winds are going to be picking up across the southeast tonight. We're going to see across the inner channels gusts between 35 to 45 miles per hour, possibly gusting up just over 50 miles per hour as this low pressure system makes its way north. So the rain should probably just make it to the Dixon entrance, the northern areas there during the overnight hours, with rain still continuing across the Kodiak and the eastern Kenai, with winds continuing to gust as the gradient remains rather tight across Kodiak and north towards the southern Kenai. Across the interior areas of the state, we'll see a northerly flow beginning to pick up as an offshore flow develops between the high pressure to the north and the low pressure to the south. Also look out for foggy conditions along the northeastern Beaufort coast back towards the northwestern coast, and that's going to continue through the morning hours, so patchy fog in those locations. However, winds should stay up high enough across much of the mountainous areas across the Brooks Range, so mainly for tomorrow they'll have some lowering ceilings as the clouds begin to drop a little bit further south. Looking for mainly clear conditions in the morning and through the day tomorrow across much of the state. And then the low pressure system across the Gulf is going to be shifting a little bit slightly east, with the main impacts for tomorrow across the southeast, bringing that rain a little bit further north, possibly a little bit further north towards the Panhandle, depending on how far that low pressure can get those the stronger waves up towards the north. Now, looking out towards the west, you'll see that this low pressure system is continuing just to sag a little bit further towards the west. Light rain showers mainly across this low pressure system, affecting the eastern Aleutians up towards the northwestern areas of the Bering there. Another low pressure approaches from the west, however. Ridging is going to be, an upper level ridge is going to be backing over here towards the Bering Strait. So that's going to keep any progression from the lows out there to the west from making it into the forecast area over the Bering. As we head into Friday, the low pressure system out in the Bering is going to weaken significantly, with the upper level ridge actually shifting right over the Bering Strait there and closing off in the upper levels. Now, the low pressure system across the southeast will also be diminishing, with conditions quite clear across much of the state, continuing dry conditions through the end of the week, with just some light rain showers and still gusty winds with that offshore flow component across the southeast. Also, we'll see the winds going on the decrease across the eastern Beaufort seacoast, but the tightening gradient across the northwestern coast will bring some gusty winds through the day on Friday. Now, the southwest will be fairly quiet and dry, so better conditions as we head towards the end of the week. Now, temperatures today were pretty warm across the southeast into the lower to mid 50s, as well as all along the coastal locations, with a few locations across the central interior getting up into the 60-degree range, and then across the Brooks Range and north, that's where you have that changeover towards the freezing temperatures, with the coldest out there this afternoon towards Point Lay around 31 degrees. Now, the Seward Peninsula and south, another change of temperatures across this area as we are in the upper 40s to the north and the mid 50s to the south, with the warmer temperatures across the southeast today. We had just to the east of Bethel, we had temperatures reporting up to 64 degrees at Kwethluk, and then across the Bristol Bay area, we had temperatures rising into the upper 50s. So probably the warmest general area in the state was from the southern tip of the Kenai, from Homer on over towards Bristol Bay. So just that warm front making it temperatures a little bit more comfortable. And then across the Bering, temperatures generally were in the mid to upper 40s. Now tonight, those temperatures across the Bering are going to stay in the 40-degree range, closer to the mid 40s, and the Alaska Peninsula as well. Now, the coastal areas across the Gulf Coast expect temperatures mainly to be in the 40s, but some colder temperatures up there towards Cordova and Valdez, dropping down into the upper 20s to lower 30s as that offshore flow begins to bring that drier air mass down. That'll maximize the radiational cooling. So many temperatures from the Anchorage Bowl and north are going to see temperatures below freezing, and across the interior colder tonight as well, in the 20s, getting up towards Arctic Village up there in the teens. And then across the north and northwestern coast, temperatures are going to be near freezing or just above. And the west coast will see a range mainly in the mid-30s to the lower 40s. As we head into the day tomorrow, the warmest temperatures again across the state will be where that warm front had pushed it into, across the Bristol Bay Area. Temperatures there getting up into the mid-50s through the Alaska Peninsula. The rest of the Bering will see temperatures in the mid-40s, including up there near St. Lawrence Island. And then we'll see across the east, again, tomorrow's temperatures are supposed to be in the lower 50s, and mainly towards the panhandle. As the clouds begin to work their way, they're going to limit the temperatures across much of the southeast. Interior locations can expect slightly cooler temperatures, mainly in the mid-40s, with up across the Brooks Range and north, very similar today, in the mid to upper 30s. Now looking at your flying weather for tomorrow, good conditions mainly across the interior areas of the state. Main focus for flying conditions or concerns would be across the far north coast with MVFR and IFR ceilings, and across the Gulf, as well as that low pressure system remains out there. And also around the low pressure system that's in the Bering, look for IFR conditions around that low pressure center just south of the Pribilof Islands. And as we head into tomorrow afternoon, conditions are going to hold on across the Brooks Range and north there. And then across the Gulf, conditions will begin to improve as that low pressure continues to diminish. Now looking at your past conditions in more depth, we could see MVFR conditions going to VFR for Anaktuvik, and Adigan Pass will also possibly be MVFR in the morning and then improve during the afternoon. And Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will also be MVFR going to VFR. And then mainly MVFR conditions very similar in that area going to VFR during the day. Now Windy Pass will be VFR conditions as much as the south central areas, VFR at Isabel, and Mentasta will be VFR conditions. Tanita, VFR. Portage will be VFR. And then we'll see Chilkoot and White Pass stay VFR tomorrow as that system just remains to the south. Now looking at your freezing levels for tomorrow morning, here's the white trace line from the northwest coast on down towards the south. Like I said, that freezing level is just going to be skirting there at the northeast Gulf Coast, probably a little bit further south this freezing line as we head towards Cordova, and then we'll see it skirt across the southeast. Now the upper levels warmest around this upper level ridge that's beginning to center across the Bering Strait at 10,000 feet, and then declining 6,000 to 4,000 across the Bering as well as the Gulf. Now looking at your icing for tomorrow, the main concern is going to be across the low pressure systems between 6,000 to 8,000 feet for the Bering and the southern areas of the Gulf. The jet stream here closes off this ridge across the Bering Strait. Here's the center, just off the northwest coast for tomorrow afternoon, with a strong detached jet just to the south. The subtropical jet is racing around 160 knots just south of the eastern Aleutians. Now looking at your 9,000 foot winds, we have mainly an easterly flow around 9,000 feet at 15 to 20 knots across much of the state. A little bit stronger flow there across the Gulf of Alaska between 30 to 35 knots to the south. And the change of direction around this low pressure system out there in the Bering with the strongest speeds on the north side of that low between 20 to 30 knots. Looking at the winds at 3,000 feet, very similar as the system becomes more stacked towards the surface. Now 25 to 30 knots also at the 3,000 foot level across the Bering. And then across the Gulf, winds will be speeding along the southern areas of the Gulf, 25 to 35 knots, and weaker flow across the state between 10 and 20 knots, all out of the east. Now looking at your turbulence, just to sum this all up, you might see a couple speed maxes go through the eastern Alaska range as that cold front initially begins to sag south. And then we'll also see the offshore winds bring some turbulent conditions along the southeastern areas. And also with a low pressure system across the western Gulf, look out there near Kodiak Island and the eastern the Aleutian range there, and then also below 4,000 feet for all these locations, including the central areas of Aleutians, and then below 6,000 feet out towards the southeast. Okay, in just a moment, we'll be back with your marine forecast.
We have a big solar flare coming in, so we're out here on an aurora hunt. It's a CME, it's a dynamite, coronal mass ejection. It's when the sun, it kicks off energy and these explosions that are larger than the earth, explosion type things coming off of sunspots. And if that energy is pointing straight at the earth, it gets caught up in our magnetic field, and that energy, electrons, come down our magnetic field, collide with oxygen up there about 50 or a couple hundred miles high, and that's what generates the northern lights. My job as the photographer and the aurora hunter is to be in position, you know, location, location, location. And I like to think I'm composing. Mother Nature, it's a bit of a teamwork thing, you know, she's got to put on the show, but I have to be in the right position and of course with the right tools and the know-how. I've stopped keeping track of how much time I spend out here in terms of hours. It's more in terms of weeks or months, or at this point years now. You know, it was always in me. Even when I was a kid growing up in the lower 48, I would spend nights sleeping on our trampoline, just staring at the stars. I'm in 4th grade and I'm going, wow, look at those stars. And I'd see how many nights in a row I could sleep on the trampoline. And I think my record was 23 nights in a row. So I was doing kind of strange things for an Iowa country boy. I can remember specifically the very first time I saw the northern lights. It was 1989, the peak of the solar cycle, and I was going to graduate school in Laramie, Wyoming. And all of a sudden we had heard the northern lights were out. It's like, what are those? I'd never really seen them before. And my goodness gracious, we were on top of a mountain in the Laramie Range and they were turning blood red. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And the very first picture I took, that was 1990. Now, an old film camera, Pentax K1000 on a plastic Kmart tripod. Took 2 shots on slide film and got them back. And I thought, oh my gosh, this beautiful green thing swirling about. And from that moment, I was hooked. When I realized that you could preserve the auroras on film, I just experimented a ton. I'd had a heaping stack of slides, the no good ones. The experiments gone wrong, you know, too dark, fuzzy, out of focus, too light. I had this huge garbage can full of excess slide film, and that was just the learning curve. Well, when I go out here, it's all about getting the shot. And my wife and I, we've called it the hero shot. But the hero shot is the one where you just come home and you go, look at this. And everyone goes, wow, and you feel like a hero. It's a wonderful feeling, you know. It's good for the ego, of course. It's good for the business. But if you kind of strip that away, it's good for what's inside you, because that's really the hero moment in nature. And Mother Nature's putting on this show that is just mind-blowing. It's unbelievable. When I first resigned from my day job, that was in 1996, and decided I wanted to become a full-time aurora hunter, my goal from that moment and to this day still is to get 1 hero shot a year. I figured, and I'm talking the kind that somebody wants to buy from you and hang on their wall, where the auroras are extremely bright, very active, turning colors, where you can't believe your eyes. If you get to preserve a little sample of that with a photograph, Well, it's what we call the hero shot. Wow, what a feeling. I mean, oh, you're elevated, levitating, you are lifted up. Your spirits are so high that I love that feeling. And I think I get that so much from seeing cool things in nature that I will go way out of my way to find that. And I can, you know, the next day, well, I'll be just laying there thinking about it and thinking how lucky I was or how fortunate. Of course, I just, you know, spent 2 weeks sitting there staring at the sky and not seeing anything, so you got to remember that, you know, luck is kind of a relative term, but I still just feel incredibly lucky to be even in a position to where I could have been there, taken a photograph of it, and just mainly experienced it. Well, that feeling could last for days.
Hello, welcome back to the show, and now we're on to your marine forecast. Looking at the ice map of the ice edge today, you can see just off of Barrow we do have a small region of ice, and that's going to be actually probably melting over the next several days as we keep that stronger easterly flow that could drift a little bit further towards the west as well. Now looking at your marines in the southeast, this is going to be the main concern for the next 2 days are the winds that are going to be on the increase beginning tonight. So we're looking at a northerly flow developing across the inner channels at 30 knots, a higher gust there, just small crafts, but the gusts are going to be significant, up to 45 knots in these areas. Now, as you head further towards the Dixon entrance, we pick up a southeasterly flow with a small craft advisory there as well. And then the outer waters are going to also be all small craft between 25 to 30 knots, with gales just to the south here at 35 knots. The seas on this day will be between 5 to 6 feet across the inner waters, and then we'll see 14 to 18 feet highest seas to the south. Now looking at your Friday forecast, going Thursday into Friday, we still keep those stronger winds with 25 to 30 knots there across the inner channels, becoming southeast to the south at 20 knots. So just a little bit weaker there, and the outer waters will be between 15 to 25 knots. The lightest winds to the north towards Yakutat, and the seas on this day will be 4 to 6 feet across the inner channels. The outer waters will be 10 to 12 feet. So the winds will be basically trending down towards the latter part of the afternoon on Friday in the southeast. Now for South Central, we'll see mainly a northeasterly flow there across the area for your Thursday forecast, and then we'll see wind speeds between 20 to 30 knots across the entire area, small crafts for the western areas of the Gulf and across Shelikof Strait. And then seas on this day for the Sound and the northern Cook Inlet would be 1 to 2 feet, and then the southern inlet around 6 feet. The Gulf waters will be between 10 to 14 feet, with 10 feet there for Shelikof Strait. As we head into Friday, notice that we become much lighter across the south central areas with 10 knots, variable wind conditions all across the area. Seas will be lighter this day across the inlet and down towards Shelikof Strait. Expect seas around 2 feet, and then the western areas of the Gulf will also be lighter, between 7 to 8 feet. Looking at the Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula locations, we'll see winds between 15 to 20 knots tomorrow out of the east to northeast direction. Seas on the Bering side will range from 4 to 8 feet, and then on the Pacific side around 13 feet. On your Friday, expect winds to change direction out of the north to northwest at about 10 to 15 knots, variable winds down there on the south end of Kodiak Island. Seas will be between 3 to 6 feet on the Bering side, and on this day the sea is a little bit lower there for the Pacific, 8 to 9 feet. Looking at the Aleutians, a stronger westerly flow, fairly uniform across the area, between 20 to 30 knots. Small crafts in the central Aleutians there and parts of the eastern Aleutians. Seas on this day will range between 8 to 10 feet in general, and then the central and eastern areas will also see higher seas between 12 to 14 feet. Looking at your Friday forecast, fairly strong winds persisting there. Sorry, small craft advisories for most of the area out of the west to northwest. And then we'll see seas on this day also ranging between 8 to 14 feet. However, the highest seas will be out towards the western Aleutians. Looking at the west coast, we'll see an easterly flow for your Thursday forecast between 15 to 25 knots, the strongest winds just south of Nunivak Island there. And seas on this day will be 6 to 8 feet with the highest seas towards the northern Bering. Looking at your Friday forecast, a little bit shift in wind direction, northeast to a southeasterly flow as you head towards the Pribilof Islands. Seas on this day will be 3 to 6 feet with the highest seas towards the Pribilofs. Now looking at the north and northwestern coast for your Thursday, expect an easterly flow to northeast, and we'll see some freezing spray there in the colder temperatures across the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. And then we'll see seas on that day between 10 and 11 feet with lower seas towards Kotzebue Sound with 7 to 4 feet as you wrap around the west coast. On your Friday forecast, expect the winds to be a little bit stronger there as across the Chukchi Sea with 30 knot winds, and then we'll see 20 to 25 knot across the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Winds will primarily be again east to northeast across the entire area with seas between 5 to 12 feet. Looking at another recap of the forecast as we head into the end of the week, expect these low pressure systems to be the primary focus for rain across the area, drying conditions across the interior with patchy fog along the north and northwest coast. As we head into tomorrow, that rain across the southeastern areas of the Gulf will lift closer into the southeast, bring some rainy and windy conditions. And across the Bering, we're expecting this system to remain stalled, bring some late rain conditions all the way through the western Aleutians. As we head into your Friday, expect conditions to be colder across the state as this colder air mass begins to sag to the south, lighter winds. However, we'll see some stronger winds persisting across the southeastern areas as that gradient stays a little bit tighter there. And then across the western areas of the Bering, this low pressure system is going to be weakening. So the rain showers will be minimum as we head into the latter part of your Friday. And just one more look at the northwest coast, that'll be the other area of concern for winds as that northeasterly flow picks up between high pressure to the north and the low pressure to the south. Otherwise, we're looking at a fairly good forecast for the end of the week if you're in the central locations. Thanks for staying with us tonight, and I look forward to joining you tomorrow evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Support comes from the University of Alaska College Savings Plan, helping you and your child save for college every step of the way, from diapers to diploma. More information at uacollegesavings.com.